A lot of famous authors have lived in the state of Connecticut over the years. Novelists, poets, playwrights, as well as journalists, historians, and others. Pictured here are some of the most famous: Mark Twain, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Wallace Stevens, Eugene O'Neill, and the houses associated with them below. But there are also other houses spread throughout the state that few people know were once the home of writers as well. On my website, Historic Buildings of Connecticut, historicbuildingsct.com, I've written posts about houses and other buildings all over Connecticut. Sometimes my research reveals that a house was the home of a published writer. Some of these writers were even household names in early America, but they may not be well known today. This is the first in a series of videos where I'm going to tell you about some of these houses and the authors who lived in them. In this video, I'll tell you about two houses, one in North Haven and the other in Farmington. These were once the homes of two men, one a minister and the other a politician, who wrote early histories of the United States in the first decade of the 1800s. Their books are fairly obscure today, but they played a part in the developing intellectual life of their country at a time when the United States was still quite new. Before I get started, I also want to point out that these houses are not museums, they are privately owned. So you can certainly walk by them, but please remember to respect the privacy of the property owners. So let's talk about these author houses. Our first house faces the green in North Haven. It's a classic center chimney colonial house built in 1761. It was built for Reverend Benjamin Trumbull. He graduated from Yale in 1765, and the following year became pastor of the Congregational Church in North Haven, a position he held for the next 60 years. He also served as both a chaplain and as a volunteer soldier in the Revolutionary War. There are some evocative descriptions of the house itself in two local histories published in the 19th century. According to J. L. Rocky in his 1892 History of New Haven County, in 1761, Reverend Trumbull, quote, purchased a tract of land of Joseph Pierpont and began the erection of a dwelling house upon it. The old mansion is still standing and in excellent repair. As a historic point, there is none greater in the town. The great double doors were ever ajar. Over its threshold were ceaselessly trooping scores of busy feet, ministers, messengers, committees, referees, and strangers, made it a religious caravanserai and rested in its shadow. Hither came during the Revolutionary War aides and officers with dispatches, and later eminent historians and theologists tarried within its walls." Unquote. Sheldon B. Thorpe, in his North Haven Annals, also published in 1892, lavishes praise on the house, noting that, quote, its admirable preservation today attests the work of the painstaking, careful builder of that period, unquote. Also, quote, the quaint moldings and devices surmounting windows and doors attest that unusual ornamentation was bestowed upon it. It presented a striking contrast to the humble domicile on the plain below, where the Reverend Mr. Stiles lived, and was indeed what it came at length to be called the quality house of the village, unquote. Thorpe also comments on the troops of visitors who came to seek out the learned minister, including from nearby Yale. So what were the writings of Reverend Trumbull? His earliest significant work related to an ongoing dispute in the 1770s, far away in the Wyoming Valley along the north branch of the Susquehanna River. This region was claimed by both the colonies of Connecticut and Pennsylvania. A group from Connecticut, led by Silas Deane of Wethersfield, had formed the Susquehanna Company and purchased land in the region from the Iroquois. Yankee settlers soon headed to the region and founded settlements, including the town of Wilkes-Barre, but they were opposed by settlers from Pennsylvania, and the dispute between the two groups sometimes heated up into armed conflict. As with other heated topics of the time, there was also an active pamphlet war in which the various claims were argued. Trumbull weighed in on this dispute with a series of letters published in the Connecticut Current newspaper in defense of the settlers' claims. These were collected and expanded into a pamphlet published in New Haven in 1774, entitled A Plea in Vindication of the Connecticut Title to the Contested Lands lying west of the province of New York, addressed to the public by Benjamin Trumbull, A.M. The dispute dragged on into the 1780s when a compromise was eventually reached whereby the region became part of Pennsylvania and the Yankee settlers were recognized as citizens of that commonwealth. This was, by the way, not the only territory to the west claimed by Connecticut back in those days. For instance, there was also the so-called Western Reserve of Connecticut that's now part of the state of Ohio. Reverend Trumbull also wrote a number of other works, including the 2-volume Complete History of Connecticut, Civil and Ecclesiastical. It was first published in 1797. This is a later edition from 1818. Trumbull, who died in 1820, also planned to write a 3-volume History of America, but only completed the first volume, which was published in 1810. Its full title was A General History of the United States of America from the Discovery in 1492 to 1792, or Sketches of the Divine Agency in their Settlement, Growth, and Protection, and especially in the late memorable Revolution, in 3 volumes. Volume 1, exhibiting a general view of the principal events from the discovery of North America to the year 1765. It would have been interesting to read his account of the Revolutionary War in which he himself participated, but the work remained unfinished. Our next early American historian was Timothy Pitkin. He was the grandson of William Pitkin, who was governor of Connecticut from 1766 to 1769, and the son of Reverend Timothy Pitkin, who was the minister of the Congregational Church in Farmington from 1752 to 1785. The younger Timothy, born in 1766, was a Yale graduate who studied law with Oliver Wolcott. He went on to become a lawyer in Farmington and entered politics as a Federalist, serving in the Connecticut State Legislature and in the U.S. Congress. In 1803, he bought his father's house on Colton Street in Farmington. This Federal-style house with a large front lawn had been built in 1788. Pitkin left Farmington in 1840 and died in 1847. His son, Reverend Thomas Clapp Pitkin, wrote a memoir of his father for the New England Historic and Genealogical Society that was published in 1881. I'll read the section of this that covers his period in politics in Washington, which included the War of 1812 and mentions his historical writings. Quote, in 1805, he was elected one of the representatives in Congress and continued in that capacity every year until 1819, when, in consequence of a change in the politics of the state, he and his colleagues were superseded. He was in Washington during the last 4 years of Jefferson's administration and the 8 years of Madison's, and 2 years of that of Monroe. During this period, he made himself conversant with the political transactions of the American government in relation to the non-importation law, the embargo, and non-intercourse systems, and the war against Great Britain which followed. He made it his business to collect public documents and state papers, and, with a pen in hand, he made constant memoranda of passing events, especially of the confidential communications made to the House of Representatives by the executive. As war was declared with closed doors, the opponents of the measure, of whom Mr. Pitkin was one, had no opportunity in debate of presenting to their constituents the reasons for their opposition, and they resolved therefore to address them directly on the subject. The Honorable Josiah Quincy prepared the draft of this address, but at his request Mr. Pitkin furnished that part of it which treated of the commerce which was allowed us by the French government, and whether it was worth a war in order to secure it, and whether it could be secured by war. This part was accordingly inserted in the address. During the years 1816 and 1817, Mr. Pitkin published the first and second editions of the Commercial Statistics of the United States. Of the second edition, 250 copies were taken by Congress for the use of the government. After leaving Congress, Mr. Pitkin was engaged in his professional pursuits and in preparing a political and civil history of the United States from 1763 to 1797, or the close of the administration of Washington. This history was published in 2 volumes in 1828. In 1835, he published a third and enlarged edition of his statistics, including some account of the banks and manufactures of the country. From the time of his leaving Congress, he was annually chosen to the Connecticut legislature from Farmington until 1830, when he was elected senator from District No. 3, established under an amendment of the Constitution. He was a member of the convention which framed the new Constitution of the state. In 1830, he declined all public business, and soon after relinquishing his professional pursuits, he devoted his time to a careful revision of his private papers and public documents, and in reviewing the writings and correspondence of Washington, Jefferson, Jay, and others, together with the diplomatic correspondence of the United States. In addition to this, he prepared sketches of some of the political transactions during the administrations of the elder Adams, of Jefferson, and Madison. These sketches, which are in the form of letters to his sons, and are in fact a continuation of his political and civil history of the United States, have not been published." Unquote. I hope you enjoyed this video about 2 forgotten writers from Connecticut and their houses which are still standing today. If you did enjoy it, please consider subscribing. It would also be great if you could hit the like button. I would greatly appreciate it. And don't forget to visit my website, historicbuildingsct.com. Thanks.